This is our very first attempt at giving our two very long-haired cats a sanitary trim, so fair warning, go ahead and brace yourselves. It's not going to be pretty. This is most definitely not a tutorial. It's actually quite the opposite, and it's probably a better example of what not to do. But like I said, this is our very first time, so hopefully, we will get better the more that we do it. I do have a small pair of scissors that I use occasionally to trim their sanitary area because it can be a problem whenever they go to the bathroom. Doesn't matter what they're doing. If they have a lot of hair back there, it gets in the way. So as much as I don't want to give my cats a sanitary trim because it's not going to be pleasurable for any of us, it's kind of a necessity because it's just not worth them getting stuff stuck on them whenever they go to the bathroom. You know, obviously that's unavoidable. It's either constant butt baths because they have poop and pee stuck on them, or it's this. So I'm trying to go with the lesser of two evils. I've never in my life used a pair of clippers, so I was extremely overwhelmed. I had no idea what I was doing. And my only qualifications were that I watched a couple of YouTube videos prior to doing this. They made it look fairly easy in the videos that I watched, so I was trying to hype myself up a little bit, you know? I knew it wasn't going to be a piece of cake, but I didn't really think it was going to be as hard as it ended up being, because both of my cats are very used to being groomed regularly. I trim their nails very often. I brush their teeth. I comb them all the time, and they never give me problems. They are so well behaved when I try to do any of those things. I mean, don't get me wrong, they can be pretty squirmy sometimes and not want to sit still for me, but I really try to make grooming a positive experience for them so that it's not something that they hate and give me a really hard time with. As you can see, I oftentimes use the cat squeeze treats, or I call them cat go-gurts, to bribe them, and it usually works pretty well. Okay, so here I'm struggling to find an attachment piece for the clippers that will work because the first one that I tried wasn't taking off any of Leo's fur. I don't know if it was just my own error. It probably was, but I wanted to try a different attachment piece and see if it made any difference. I think in one of the YouTube videos that I had watched prior, it said something about a 10 millimeter piece, and so I had a 9, and that's what I ended up going with. The 9 millimeter one was still giving me a pretty hard time. Like I said, just user error most likely, but hardly any of Leo's fur was coming off, and I was trying to go to the base of his skin. It was definitely challenging for me to do by himself because I was holding him. I had his tail tucked in between my legs for the most part because I didn't want his tail swishing back and forth and getting in the way. And I was also holding the clippers in my other hand, but I was also trying to pull his fur apart, you know, separate it just a little bit so that I could better reach the base of his skin because he just has so much fur. It's unbelievable. I could barely even get to his skin. The clippers that I'm using are from a brand called One Is All. I got them on Amazon. They were just the most reviewed ones that I could find on Amazon. They had over 85,000 ratings with a 4.5-star rating. And they are pet clippers. I definitely didn't want to get human ones. I just know there's such a difference in textures and I don't know, everything when it comes to human hair versus pet hair. So I wasn't going to take any chances. These are definitely pet clippers. Not that it ended up really making a difference because I did such a terrible job. I probably would have done just as bad with any other clippers though. I was hardly getting any of Leo's fur off. Obviously, I was worried about hurting him. It was my first time using the clippers ever. I really had no idea what I was doing, and more than anything, I was just trying to be careful, you know? I wanted to get a better feel for it, and I also wanted to make sure that Leo was comfortable. Most definitely, though, did not want to nick him or anything, and I know that cats have delicate skin. So even if it meant not getting much fur off, which ended up being the case, it was more so for learning purposes and just making sure that I could do this safely. Okay, let me shut up for a few seconds so you can hear the clippers. I feel like they're kind of loud, no? I mean, they're advertised as low noise because that would work best for animals. A loud buzzing noise, most animals are not going to do well with. But I think that these are kind of loud. I mean, maybe in comparison, they're low noise. This reminded me of getting a tattoo, which put me on edge a little bit more than I already was. And while Leo really didn't mind, he's pretty easygoing, so not too many things bother him. Tink, on the other hand, she took issue with the noise. And she's fairly easygoing also, but she definitely took issue with the noise. She was running for the hills as soon as I turned it on with her in the room. I'll get to Tink in just a little bit, but Leo was doing phenomenal. For what it was and for what I was doing to him, he was a champ. However, his patience runs through quickly, and so while he does really well in the beginning, it progressively gets a little bit worse, and he eventually had a meltdown. Okay. Here. Leo. Yeah. Here. Did that make it all better? You've been such a good kitty. Yeah. But you know this is for your own good. We don't want dingleberries. Then you have to take a bath. Yeah, we hate baths. You might be thinking, why didn't I just go ahead and stop when he had the meltdown? But I think it's really, really important to always end on a good note, especially in situations like this where it's just not a very positive experience when it really comes down to it. It's not something that he wants to do, and it's not something that I want to do, but I do not want to create a bad memory for him. So I started clipping maybe for like 10, 15 more seconds, just with a lot of reinforcement, gave him some more of his treat, and then we called it a day. Now it's time for little Stinky Tinky. And maybe you're wondering, why do I call her Stinky Tinky? Well, it's because of all the dingleberries. Her hair is so long and thick around her butt. She almost always gets dingleberries. It's unavoidable. Even peeing for her can be a bit of a problem because it'll even get on her fur on the way out. So it's really overdue that she finally has a good trim down there. My little scissor trims are just not cutting it for her anymore. As she grows older, she's about 7, 8 months at the time of this video. Her hair is way too long and way too thick. There is just too much of it for my little scissors to make a big difference. Needless to say again, but she was freaked out by the sound of the clippers. I could hardly get her to sit still for me, and that's totally unlike her. But the clippers were loud and a constant noise, and she just wasn't having it. So more than anything for her especially, I wanted it to be some good exposure, lots of positive reinforcement. I was telling her she's a good kitty, and I was saying her name a lot and giving her the go-gurt. And while she has a lot of fur, it's a completely different texture than Leo's. Leo's is much more likely to tangle. I keep it brushed very well, so for the most part, he's without any tangles. But Tink's fur is such a consistency that it doesn't tangle. Not that it couldn't tangle, but it would take a lot more to get tangles in her fur. Whereas Leo, I think he could roll over once on the floor and he might end up with a little tangle here or there. Okay, now I brought in reinforcements, and this was about a week later from the initial time, so we've all emotionally recovered. And I brought in a man who actually uses clippers on himself, which is perfect because he's familiar with them. Unfortunately, though, it was not a knight in shining armor type situation because he also couldn't figure out how to get much fur off of Leo at once. And to top it all off, Leo's patience was running extra thin today. I mean, he was barely touching the clippers to the very tip of Leo's fur, not even doing a single thing, and Leo was freaking out. So we gave Leo some time to cool down and wanted to try it out on little Stinky Tinky, and thankfully it was a successful mission. Her fur was coming off like crazy. I should add that he took off the black attachment piece on the end. There was no extra security on the bottom. He was just using the clippers, which worried me a little, but he is familiar with clippers, and he was confident enough that he wasn't going to cause any nicks as long as he was careful and went pretty slowly. And surprisingly, it worked out really well. He was able to get so much fur off of her. It was like the black attachment piece, the guard, was just preventing any fur from being able to be cut. It just wasn't allowing us enough room. Maybe we were using the wrong size. Maybe we could have tried one of the other 6 options that had come with the kit. But it worked out really well for us with no casualties. And I really liked that I was able to just focus on her, keeping her still and comforting her. Having 2 people made a big difference. And in no time, she was all trimmed up and good to go. Now, he could have cut her fur a little bit shorter and he could have covered a little bit of a wider area. But for this being his first time using the clippers on her and for her sitting as well as she did and it actually making a difference and getting a lot of fur off, it was perfect and we didn't want to push it any more than we already had done.
Pretty good, Tink. Good kitty. Oh my goodness, Tink. That's good.
Then we wanted to go back to our little electrocuted monster and try him one more time without the guard on the end. And what do you know? We were getting a whole bunch of fur off. His fur was still a lot harder to get off than Tink's. Tink's was so smooth in comparison. But Craig was able to pull his fur with one hand and kind of trim with the other hand. He was doing something similar in the beginning, but he said that he was just going to try to stretch out the fur a little bit more or maybe a little bit tighter. I don't know. I still have no idea how I would be able to do this by myself and actually be cutting significant amounts of fur off. I feel like it has to be done with 2 people. But I was also very intimidated when I first started cutting their nails, and I would never do that by myself either. So hopefully we can do this a few more times, and maybe I'll have a better grasp on things.